speaker today. Kevin Brady represents the 8th District of Texas in the U.S. House of Representatives. He holds the leadership post of Deputy Republican Whip and serves as the Ways and Means Committee, one of the most powerful committees in Congress, giving Texas in our region greater voice on issues like taxes, Medicare, and trade. Kevin is also the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Health Subcommittee, a pro-family, pro-small business conservative. Kevin's strong belief in free enterprise guides him as the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee. In Congress, he has been named Hero of the Taxpayers, Small Business Champion, Super Friend of the Seniors. He has received the Golden Bulldog Award by the Watchdogs of the Treasury, special recognition by Citizens Against Government Waste, and a perennial winner of the Guardian of Small Business and Spirit Enterprise Award sponsored by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Kevin lives in the Woodlands with his wife Kathy and the two sons Will and Sean, and I'd like to introduce our congressman and our friend Kevin Brady.
Thanks for the wonderful introduction. More importantly, thanks for letting me be here today to visit with you about some of the key issues. This is a great Chamber of Commerce, and it's a privilege to be able to visit with you this morning. I was in Washington during the wonderful holidays and the weekends after that on this fiscal cliff, so was not able to attend the Chamber banquet. I have a commendation that we passed and have for Helen Thornton for doing just a great job for leading our Chamber of Commerce. You have a great organization, but you kept moving it forward in a big way, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. Congratulations. Thanks. Well, let's talk. I apologize for being late. We have two boys, and our fourth grader has some special needs. And so every year we meet with our CISD and sort of work through the game plan for next year. And I know sort of popular bash schools these days. In our school, in CISD, we have really good people. The truth of the matter is, we looked all around. This is a great help for kids that need a little more attention in work. So we're really grateful for our schools. Let's talk about some of the key issues going forward this year, sort of where we're at, how we start the session, divide the government again. In the next 90 days, there's 3 or 4 opportunities to get our financial house in order. Probably the best opportunities since I've been in Congress, and we need to take advantage of it. Protecting the Second Amendment, very important. Some of the issues going on up there. And then let's talk about, let's recap real quick what happened with Fiscal Cliff. President Obama got real, did you know that? The Democrats gained 2 seats in the Senate, so it would be basically 55-45. Takes 60 votes to bring up the bill there, 67 to override the presidential. House is retained by the Republicans. Democrats gained 9 seats, so it's 233 to 200. As you can tell, 290 is sort of the magic number for overriding the presidential bill or passing constitutional amendments. So it's clearly divided government again for at least the next 2 years. My role, Scott mentioned it, but I'll move to third in seniority in Ways and Means Committee. Love it because we're in the middle of tax reform, Social Security, Medicare, trade, energy taxes, just sort of the whole key issues for the business community around. I'm leading the chairmanship of the trade subcommittee, which I've worked on for a long time, and stepping over to take help. We're at a critical point in healthcare in our country. It's critical to our region in a major way. It is for patients, it is for local doctors and hospitals, certainly is for our small business community. So getting a chance to step in the middle of that whole fight nationally is good. I'm going to chair the Joint Economic Committee. I've led that organization for the Republicans in the House and Senate for the last 4 years, that it rotates back and forth from the House to the Senate chairmanship, so I take that over. I'm still involved as one of the leaders in the House of Conservatives and Deputy Whip, which means I count noses to get to 218 pass bills out of the House. Next 90 days, as you know, the debt ceiling for America is reached the last 2 weeks in February. They've already reached the debt ceiling. Now they're moving cash flow around. the last 2 weeks is when they basically run out of options. And we'll talk about what that means, but that's coming forward then. And right after that, March 1st, automatic spending cuts. It calls the question, but basically automatic spending cuts, about $110 billion right now, this year. Now, 10 years in the future. Now, and it's a double-edged sword, but it's very important that we begin to change the direction of the country. Government funding for the rest of the year expires right after that, and then the budgets are due, or a budget is due, ironically on tax day. Here's what we did last week. We rearranged the schedule. We took the debt ceiling and moved it back 90 days to May 19th, and the purpose was to go direct to spending. We wanted nothing in between what we think needs to be done with getting our financial house in order. So we moved it back to the line of May 19th, but we added provision because the Senate hasn't passed a budget in 4 years. Because the Apple iPad wasn't introduced the last time the Senate passed a budget. And they really shirked their constitutional duty. We said, look, you either pass a budget or we withhold your payment. That's the way it works in real life. You don't do your work, you don't get paid. So it's time for the Senate to do that. And already it's having a difference in the fact that 2 weeks ago, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee said, don't expect a budget this year. 2 days ago, she said, expect a budget on time. So I think we're starting to make some progress there. But that's important because, one, we're in the middle of a deficit crisis. None of you live without a budget in your business or even in a more informal one at home. You certainly can't in the largest economy in the world, so it needs to be done. So that takes us straight to the cuts, the government funding expiring at the end of the year as well, and that's important. Let's talk about those automatic spending cuts. Here's what they look like. Remember this, we've always used this chart, sort of shows the federal budget. That's defense, that's non-defense, and they call it discretionary because that's what we actually budget each year, these two. The rest are on autopilot, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the $200 billion we owe on interest on our debt, other mandatory programs. And as you know, if you qualify for them, you're entitled to them. That's why, but they're almost 2/3 of the federal budget, driving a big part of it. But right now, these automatic spending cuts, for the most part, land right there in those two pockets. What it does is takes the federal budget this year from $1.047 trillion down to $947 trillion this year. Now, that sounds like a lot in the scheme of things. It's still a small part of the deficit that we're running as a country. But the first significant change in the direction of spending, at least in those two areas. It's a double-edged, well, here's what it looks like, those cuts. Almost 50% land on defense. Another big chunk land on non-defense. This is interest savings. That's just from not borrowing that extra money that we have to borrow if we're going to spend it. So, you lower what we spend, you lower what we owe. Medicare has a small 2% cut, some of Obamacare subsidies, but a lot of it lands on defense. What's exempted? Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, a number of those key programs. The double-edged sword, we talked about this last time all meeting. A number of those cuts land on defense. A lot of those, I think they're poorly designed. The last part we ought to be, depending on waste money, and we've already agreed to cut $500 billion out of it. This is on top of that. It's going to hollow out our military in a significant way. Texas is going to pay a big price in jobs. But I think at the end of the day, the question is going to be, we've already in the House passed out a bill to rearrange the cuts so it doesn't land on national defense. I guess at the end of the day, the Senate says no, take it or leave it. So this is going to be one of those key issues going forward because it's the spending level, long overdue, and just a step in the right direction. Design what's not so good. Let's talk about little government funding expires for the end of the from March 27th, till the end of September. That'll be dealt with right after that, and then the budgets are due April 15th. The House will pass a budget. The House will pass a budget that balances within 10 years, which seems like a long time. but you look at that chart in the slide before that shows how much of our budget, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and those. And the only way to balance within 10 years, we have to start making real reforms in those programs now to move forward. We're going House Conservatives. We will offer, as we always do, a budget that balances within 5 years. It's a pretty tough love. It gets us there. We only get about 130 votes in the House for that, but it's important to know we're so out of whack in spending in revenue that we've got to get the economy going, which makes a big difference, but we've got to have those spending restraints going forward. Let's talk about the debt ceiling. I always like to look at our debt ceiling perspective from the 1900s on, and you can tell we've had higher periods, but right now, the war on terror raised it some. This is sort of the spending binge of the last number of years. It's taken that, but look where our future is as a country. And every expert tells us when your economy gets to that much debt, when your country gets that much debt, your economy starts to slow down. It's just a drag on. You create fewer jobs, there's fewer opportunities, then you create less revenues. It's really a spiral the wrong direction. Debt creates less revenue and more debt, and so you gotta get control spending to get the economy going as well. So what's our debt made out of? Used to be about fairly evenly balanced between what we owe each other, like Social Security dollars that we borrowed that have to be repaid, and the dollars that we owe others, China, Japan, personal investors maybe in this room, and all that. We can tell right now, the last number of years, really big spike here. 70% of our public debt, or our overall debt, we owe to others, both within the country and outside. Who ran it up? Both parties are responsible, no question about it. Both parties are responsible for fixing this problem. Clearly, one group had a lot, I think, greater contribution to this. Bottom line, though, it's still got to be done. Both parties have to come together to solve this deal. Who owns our debt? It used to be us, publicly owned debt. Today, a lot of it's owned overseas, China being the largest, Japan, others. Part of that is that America still, compared to a lot of other countries, still looks like the best investment. I like to say we're the best looking horse in the glue factory right now. Things aren't looking so rosy around the world. So thankfully, people are still buying our debt, but that changes when we become riskier, when we don't solve our, just like the bank. If you threaten to not make your payments, if you look like you're not controlling your spending, you're a bigger risk, and that's what we're looking like. We just don't look as bad as some others right now. The last week in Ways and Means Committee, we had a hearing and we invited 4 very smart people to testify about the debt ceiling. And I picked out one of the testimonies from the Heritage Foundation. It's a conservative think tank in Washington, pretty well known, been around a long, long time. Dr. J.D. Foster, who holds one of the key economics chairs and tax chairs here, testified. And I did this slide because I thought he laid out the best options in the debt ceiling. One, he said, there's really 3 options. 2 are pretty drastic. One, he says, is sound. The first one, he said, hold the line, don't increase at all, period, for any reason. His point was that there are certain proper functions of the federal government that would go unmet. His point also is that after we reach the debt ceiling, the president, acting alone, the president decides which bills get paid and which don't. And in a country that values rule of law, where you don't pick those winners and losers for who you owe, he said that's absolutely the wrong approach to take. So he called that drastic. He also said, if we don't raise it, we are certain to downgrade for a second time America's credit rating, which doesn't just mean America's borrowing cost goes up, our borrowing costs go up. For cars, vary, for home loans, for small business lines of credit, everybody's borrowing goes up if U.S. downgrade occurs. He said the second option, this is the president's option, raising the debt limit without cutting anything at all, just a blank check. He said that's equally drastic. It ignores what we need to do to restrain spending. He said certainly will lead to downgrade of the curve. His argument was that the best option is to credibly control spending before you raise the debt. His point was put us back on a path to balancing the budget. And then secondly, accept the sequester. He said, you'll want to change the design, but bringing that spending down this year, he said, is critical. And then he said, look, then go. Take the first steps to saving Social Security. Take the first steps to saving Medicare. Get $1 plus in cuts for every dollar you debt limit. Spending caps like the bill that we hold the MAP Act. His point was these are the three options. The best one is to focus on changing the spending habits of the federal government. Just a quick fact check. People will sometimes say debt ceiling is all about past bills. It's not. It's also about your current spending and where you're headed. And so this is an opportunity to change our current spending. The trick is we just have to be careful how we do it. But it's a great opportunity for us, I think. Apparently a cartoonist made this slide for some reason. It looks like that, but it'll work. It'll work. This is the revenue, just like a business, government's revenues, cash flow changes from month to month, week to week as well. This shows last year's. It's about, in proportion to this year, you can tell April's a big month, but you can tell it varies. The money that comes from the federal government varies. There's no question. We will never default on our debt, ever. We have plenty of money for it. It's a dime of every dollar we bring in. America pays its bills. We just will. And we're going to have enough money for Social Security, have enough money for Medicare. You can tell from month to month, things are going to get dicey. 7 out of 12 months we won't be able to pay all of the kids, although we're going to be able to do some better. Medicaid, same veterans, and the rest of the government, things we tend to count on. Border security, road funding, air traffic controllers. And there's just a lot of government. Point from the heritage person is some of those are pretty important functions. You don't want just the White House deciding who they want to pay. You don't want that to happen. And so this is what the impact is. There's also cash flow week to week as well. And I took a look at the end of February, beginning of March, just to see when we hit that limit, there's no money left, what happens. In 4 days of the 2 weeks in February, cash flow I looked at says we can't even pay interest on debt on 4 of those days. And so what you do is all the bills from February 15th pile up, you pay whatever money you have, then you hold the bills until you get enough money to pay the balance that day. So you just start delaying payments, day by day and week by week and on. So it's real. Let's talk about Second Amendment. We obviously know the importance of it here in Texas. And George Mason, one of the co-authors of the Second Amendment, said, make this point. What is a militia? It's the whole people. Disarm the people is the best, most effective way, basically, to enslave them. We understand that here in Texas. Here's what the president's proposed, and you may have watched the announcement from the president, but he wants to reinstate the automatic weapons ban, some limitations on limits and bullets, and then universal background checks. And then he did 23 executive action items. I have kids in our schools. I want them safe. But I want my Second Amendment rights, your Second Amendment rights protected at home as well. The president doesn't do either. Doesn't make schools safer, doesn't protect our rights. Universal background checks, the automatic weapon bans, sounds terrific. We've had it in law before, it didn't work. Connecticut, where that horrible shooting occurred. I can't imagine how some of the things who walk into school and shoot six-year-olds multiple times, point blank. I don't understand. But Connecticut has one of the strongest gun control laws in the nation. They have a ban on those weapons. It didn't stop that person. In fact, if you look around the country, the states and communities with the absolute strongest gun control bills also have some of the highest violence rates in the nation. I live here, I work in Washington. In Washington, you literally have to go to government to get permission to have a gun. So it's in effect a gun-free district. It's one of the most violent and unsafe areas in the country. And not just because of Congress either. Chicago, you know, there's a gun shop in Chicago. They're tighter and tighter. Their mayor's trying to tighten it down more. They had 500 homicides last year. So I know it sounds good on the surface, but in real life, what happens, like universal background checks, sounds like, wow, there's big loopholes, but the truth is, you know, only people who don't have to have a background check is if a private collector buys or sells for their private collection. That's it. There's no loophole in my opinion. The frustration is, well, in the gun shows, bad guys don't go to gun shows. They just don't. It's too expensive. Most of those people are federally licensed dealers. They don't do it. They did study 14,000 prisoners in there because of their gun crimes. Less than 1% had got their gun at a gun show. They stole them. Oh, they stole most of them. Well, they took them from a friend or family. And so these won't work to change crime in America. What will is actually enforcing what we have some very strong gun laws on the books. They're not being enforced right now. 2010 and then in 2011, I think there were 70,000 violations reported and sent to the government 1 year, 40-some thousand events of people who tried to buy guns illegally in America. They lied on their background checks. They falsified their records, tried to get it. The government only prosecuted, I think, 70 1 year out of 70-some thousand. 40 out of the next year out of 40-some thousand. We ought to prosecute people who try to buy guns legally. Those who try to buy, who are legal, try to buy straw purchases for someone else. It's a 10-year prison crime. It is tough to do. They don't prosecute them at all when they catch it. And so I think one of the keys is to keep the bad guys from getting these weapons. You really need to enforce the law in a major way. And I don't think, excuse me, you know, I don't think one of the president's actions, finalizing the Obamacare changes, I'm not sure that has much to do with violent crime, maximizing enforcement efforts to prevent gun violence. Look, why did it take shootings in a theater, a school, a congressman to start saying that we probably ought to enforce the laws around here? And states have not been reporting those who are mentally ill and who've lost the right. If they've not been reporting, why haven't we been insistent that they report and keep those people away from guns? Final point here, you know, I think we've got to close the gap in our mental health system. We don't have a mental health system in America, and it's showing in a big way. I also think, you know, I think there is a culture of violence in America, but it's not coming from our sportsmen or our hunting families or those who collect guns. As a parent, for us, for our young kids, you know, TV and movies, I mean, it's just like in your face relentless violence. I mean, and just the toughest stuff here. We can't get to our remote fast enough to turn this stuff off. Yet, I think those who make the most money off sort of peddling that type of violence and influencing people, Hollywood got to pass in all of this. And they have First Amendment rights, I understand that, but whether they ought to be part of this discussion because they're helping drive it. And for a lot of people, you know, they understand what's on the screen, but there's other young people who are influenced by that. And we ought to have that discussion. Talk about fiscal recap. I don't know where you were on New Year's Eve when you kissed your honey Happy New Year's, but in Montgomery County, that smooch cost you $3,600 because your taxes went up at that very moment. That everyone's taxes in America. If you lived in John Culberson's district, that smooch was $7,000, which is expensive. So I don't know why I said that. Anyway, I'm going to move on. So anyway, way, they just explode. And so Congress needed to act to lower those rates back down. There's been a lot of, I read the internet, same as you guys, there's a lot of junk out there about what was in the fiscal cliff bill. Let's look at it so you can decide for yourself. The bill that came over from the Senate, that with 89 out of 100 senators voted for, was this bill. 92% of it was tax cuts. Most of them making the Bush tax cuts permanent. At almost, not all, almost all income levels. 7% of the bill, right there, well, they call them tax cuts, but I call them spending through the tax code because they were refundable credits. The government actually, if you qualify for certain tax provisions, sends you a check. They call that tax relief. I call that spending through the tax code. 7% was that, 1% of it was spent. That was extending unemployment for the rest of the year with the Republican reforms. 2-month delay in those spending cuts. That's what the bill did. Here's what those tax cuts look like. Half of all the tax cuts were alternative minimum tax. We talked about this before. You know, tax for the wealthy, supposed to capture 155 families. Now it captures 4 million. On New Year's Eve, it exploded to capture potentially 31 million Americans. And my guess is a number of people in this room who would pay an extra tax about $3,000 a year just from this second tax. We've tried since before Reagan to try to stop the AMT from going any further. That's what occurred in the bill, and it was expensive to do that. But we now have a lot of middle-class families who will never get hit with a tax. They probably didn't know what's coming down in Atlanta. Death tax, another big part of this. I lead the Death Tax Coalition in Washington, 42 national groups, small family-owned businesses, family-owned farms, automobile dealers, others. Our goal was to stop the death tax from exploding and would have in a major way. What was agreed upon was that we would be able to permanently index for inflation, protect $10 million for every family. And it's portable, so if the spouse dies and the wife is surviving, she gets the whole $10 million to protect. They can even give away parts of that $10 million to their kids while they're still alive, protect Uncle Sam from coming in and taking what they've spent a lifetime earning. The rate went up slightly to 40%. What I did was I got with our groups that have been fighting this with me for so long, and they said, take it. Take this permanency. Take the $10 million indexed. We don't like the rate, but with this White House and Senate, take this, it will protect us. The other cuts were the 10% bracket, 25% bracket, the marriage penalty, that area, the child tax credit. These were the tax cuts in this legislation. And I'll tell you, for me, this was a tough vote because we fought hard to make sure that the tax cuts were sent for everybody, all of them. But we've also I've worked on the Ways and Means Committee for 11 years to make the Bush tax cuts permanent. I mean, to permanently lower your taxes. We worked, frankly, longer than that to try to get the AMT stopped and the death tax permanently protected in most. And that's, I didn't like what wasn't in this bill, but these are important principles. Here's what didn't get included in that bill. Taxable incomes, those over $450,000 per household went up 39%. 2 of the personal exemptions got phased out over $300,000. What that means is, in Montgomery County, if you give $50,000 in cash away to charities, under these phase outs, you pay a tax of $1,000 for that. So, you know, you're going to there's some exemptions you fully won't get. In those 2 right here, they didn't maintain the Bush levels, but they're better than the Clinton levels. So they ended up halfway between those 2. New taxes on capital gains and dividends for those making over $450,000. Still, none of this makes sense because job creators, these people ought to be rewarding that function. Talk about the death tax going up slightly, but we did get the exemptions. Let me talk about this. It really wasn't part of the fiscal cliff. At the end of the day, even the president finally said that these taxes will go up, payroll taxes. And in fact, if you're looking at your paycheck this month, you already have seen the impact of this. That needed to be done. Social Security, I mentioned this before, we had to borrow $150 billion last year from China and other countries just to pay Social Security. Had to borrow almost that much the year before. Social Security has deteriorated more in 1 year than in 2 decades. So you couldn't permanently rob the money that goes into the Social Security Trust Fund and still protect our seniors. This shows how right now we run, if that chart kept going, it would go right there. We're running permanent deficits forever. Payroll tax cut blew that big a hole in it. It's going to blow, would have blown another bar, that big a hole in it as well. You just can't, if you're serious about saving Social Security for seniors, you can't keep that payroll tax out. You just can't. They keep score in Washington. You probably noticed that. And so what the president wanted and fought for, he wanted $1.6 trillion in new tax revenue. He got about a third of it, a little more than a third, $600 million. He wanted a new stimulus money, $50 billion, because, you know, the first one went so well. And so, in fact, wanted unlimited debt ceiling, wanted never again to come back to Washington for the checks and balances of it, and that was denied as well. We didn't get what we wanted. We wanted all the Bush tax cuts extended permanent. We got 85% of those permanent. We protected 99.3% of the taxpayers. I wanted 100%. Someone made the case, if 100 people are drowning, you can save more than 99 of them when you do it. The case answer is probably yeah. We protected the taxpayers from AMT, prevented debt tax, what we wanted was spending tax we could get. Thankfully, we also knew these other opportunities were coming up, but that was really bitterly disappointing. Finish with this. Economic growth yesterday, you saw that our economy actually contracted last quarter of last year. Why they're saying it is, as I read it in the media and watch it, isn't exactly accurate at all. But there's no question, this is the average recovery for the past 7 years. This is the Reagan recovery. This is where we're at. And that growth gap is going to get bigger and bigger. It's already over $1 trillion, it's going to get to $1.5 trillion. That's about $4 million. We're short of where we are. But look at this. If we just take our revenue, that just goes back to the average. We cut our deficit last year from over $1 trillion to $440 billion. Just the difference between raising, if your business is struggling, do you raise prices on your customers or do you attract new customers? Answer is you attract new customers for all the revenue. That's what you do by growing the economy as well, is just doing that. Just getting more taxpayers in, getting a stronger economy. Texas doing much better in most states. We cut the deficit in half just doing that. Then you put the spending restraints in place. We're back to a balanced budget, finally, in America. I'm going to stop.